welcome to this show. And I always say this is my favorite, but they're always my favorite stories when I start talking about my stories. And this is one of my favorites because it's one of the most profound stories, but it's a long story. So it's a really long story. So, just kind of, you're going to have to pause this, go to work, and then, come back to it, or maybe listen to this at work, depending on what you do. Anyway, I just want to recap the last 2 episodes because it's so important and there's so much opportunity. Like if you've got this entrepreneurial spirit and you're like, hey, I want to build a business around some of these ideas that we're presenting, this is a great business to build. So what we've learned like the last 2 episodes is one, the most impactful tool you can use is start to brainstorm and practice that creative tool, that creative muscle, and just, put that problem out there. And then just every morning, 2 minutes, just brainstorm on the problem solutions. And you just really start to practice getting into that channel, getting out of your head. You want to be in the no judgment zone. And if writing's challenging for you, just record it. And, there's tons of different platforms that will take your recording and transpose it to, or you can just record it on voice recorder, or you can record it right into notes, things like that. So there's lots of tools. So you don't have to write and you don't have to be judging your writing or things that will get you out of the flow. But the whole idea is to just keep practicing brainstorming, practicing getting out of your head, practicing learning how to solve small problems and then move on to bigger problems. And then one of the things based on the last episode where and this episode is going to be the same thing too, where we get this idea in our head that holds us back. So like I mentioned, my daughter felt she wasn't smart. And so that was such a limiting belief for her. She didn't feel like she could reach her full potential because of this limiting belief. And what we had to do was get her the help. And she wasn't, she was doing well enough that there was no help at school. There was no IEP. There was nothing. She was doing well enough that she could pass through, but she wasn't reaching her full potential. So the opportunity for you is to just really kind of start to think about those ideas that you've had that have limited yourself or have boxed you in and held you back from maybe, that you're passionate about something, whatever it is that lights you up. And you could see a future where you're doing something in line with that passion. And it doesn't have to be work. It could be hobbies. It could be your give back project. It could be anything. But what are the limiting beliefs that you have that are holding you back from being in line with that? And then really start to put those into your problem solving. Like, I believe that I can't do this because of this. And a great example, and this is where the opportunity is for education, is that we are all wired differently. We all think differently. And only the smart kids have been exposed to this type of out of the box brainstorming type of thinking, advanced problem solving that, this program's bringing to the world. But it's teaching kids. So right now in school, if you don't do well in English, or you don't do well in math, or you don't do well at an art class, or you don't do well in, chemistry, or even some of the more advanced classes, you decide your career, you decide your path based on that one experience. And it's not really real. So when we went into COVID, the very cool thing that came out of COVID, talking to my neighbors, there are kids that were struggling in the math classes they were taking at the time, whether it be geometry or algebra or any of these types of math classes. They were really struggling in the classroom because the teacher was teaching from the book, from the curriculum. When we went into COVID, they started teaching them through videos, and the kids went from barely passing to straight A's. The videos allowed them to understand the content and the material. So maybe in the past you haven't done well with the structure of how it was presented, and it may not necessarily be anything to do with your intelligence. It may not be to do with anything, and that there is really an opportunity to develop many, many, many ways to learn, many different learning paths, and that there's this way to identify how this child learns best and how to help them. Now, I know there are things at varying levels that exist right now, but what if it was for everything in every subject? And, one of the things that we go through, especially being artists or creatives, is that when we're small children, we draw these most amazing drawings. And we can make these beautiful pictures and we can be super creative. But there's some point in time during adolescence where we get the idea that if it doesn't look real, we're not a good artist. And that is so absurd because you're just not tapping into your true creative soul. It doesn't have to look real. That's the wrong criteria. And so when you start to look at education how do we help children align with what delights them, where their passions are, where they should be going, and have every path open to them. And the whole notion that, like with my daughter, she realized that it wasn't fair that she had to work harder than her sister. Once you accepted that and you're like, okay, I am willing to work harder to achieve what I'm supposed to achieve. Once you get over that, then you're like, okay, if that's the deal and I still want this, am I willing to put in the work? And it's like, yes. So the whole idea is to help children uncover their gifts, help children uncover their passions, not limit them by grades. And the grades, say, yes, you should be doing this. No, you shouldn't be doing this. But limit them by, this doesn't feel good to me. But it's not through success or not success. It just isn't something that interests me. It's not something that lights me up. So the whole idea is a different education system that aligns with opening many opportunities to children so that they then can figure out where that alignment is and what is the best path for them. And then the other thing I did with my children was, and it was so sweet, one year they gave me an iPod, so this is a number of years ago, to put all music on. And on the back of it, they engraved, "We love you conditionally." And because that was always my mantra to them, my kids, was, I love you conditionally. And not that I'm going to ever withhold love from you, but you have this obligation to, coming into this world, you have to live up to your greatness. You have to live up to your talents. You have to live up to your potential. You have this obligation to have this full life of impact. And so that's why they chose the path of medicine and doctors, because they felt that was the greatest place that they could go and where they could be. And so it's living to your full potential and just inspiring children to live from their greatness, not from their smallness. And we have a tendency to, and that's where the resilience comes in, because we have a tendency to live from our smallness. We have a tendency to live from the negative and have that hang on us and be our identity and who we are. We have an identity that aligns with the things that are wrong, not with the things that could potentially be fantastic. And so it's just changing the story. It's changing education. It's making sure that every kid knows how to brainstorm. Every kid knows that there's this unlimited idea generation tool that they have access to, and then how to use it. And we're going to teach this here, but it's how to use it and how to get the most out of it. And so that's what this program is about. Tapping into that creative part, accessing, understanding the full potential, understanding how living a life based on alignment with passions, purpose, and path, and then just figuring all that out. So this episode is my limiting beliefs. So, and I mentioned before, I had all these crazy things happen. These mini traumas happened to me as a child, lots and lots of them. Nothing happened to my sister, and so many things happened to me. And, and so one of them was when I was about 6 years old, it was somewhere between the age of 5 and 6. I can remember most of it. So it has to be after the age of 5. And so we had this girl in the neighborhood that was, everybody identified her as being just crazy, and she was around 16 years old. And whenever, we'd see her coming down the street, we'd all hide from her. I don't know why, but that was what we did. We ran away from her. Anyway, my sister was playing. We had a number of friends, and we were all playing in the front yard. And my sister and my friends, she was coming down the street, and my sister and her friends ran in the garage, and they locked me out. And she took me. And it wasn't that I willingly went with her. It just, I weighed all my options, and she was very scary. She was very threatening, and she basically grabbed me and took me with her. So it was, kind of terrifying, but not, we were always out in public. I think if she had taken me to somewhere private, it would have been terrifying, because then you're like, okay, how can I get out of this? What are my options? But we're in public. We're walking down the street. She's grabbed me. So she was, basically taking me different places around the neighborhood and, pushing me down, beating me up, just kind of, and then she was inflicting this mental torture on me. And so we had these like soccer fields at the end of our street, and in there they had public bathrooms that had all this graffiti over them. And, she told me all those names are people that have died, and she's been responsible for it in some way. And, just all these terrifying like things that she would do, talk to me about. And then she took me, further and further and further away from our house outside of the neighborhood. And, she made me lay down in these grasses, that we had these really tall grasses, and she made me lay down in the grasses, and she said, I'm leaving. I'm going to be watching you. If you move at all, I will kill you. I will just come back and I will kill you if you move from. So, I'm like weighing my odds. I'm like, is she testing me? Is she trying to figure out if I'm going to bite or if I'm going to run? So I decided I'm just going to lay there in the grasses. I'll take my chances here on this. We're still out in public. We're not anywhere that looks like, eventually someone's going to find us, right? Right? Eventually someone's going to find us. What I didn't know was, my older sister was always getting in trouble for stuff like this. And so she didn't tell my mom. Nobody told any adults that this had happened, So this girl had me. And so she left, and she was gone for a while, and she came back, and she was waving this 5-pound note. And she said, which is about $5 now, depending on the exchange rate. But she was waving this 5-pound note, and she said, I talked to your mom, and your mom said she doesn't want you anymore, and that she's given me £5 to take you away, and that you are mine now. You're going to spend the rest of your life with me, and your parents don't love you. Your mom doesn't love you. Your mom doesn't want you, and that, you're going to be with me, and you're going to do everything that I want you to do. Okay. So, I was kind of a smart ass, and I'm like, you weren't gone long enough. There's no way. But part of me was like starting to evaluate this whole scenario, which is, does my mom really want me? Would my mom ever, if, let's say she ran to our house and she ran back and she did have this conversation with my mom, would this be an answer that my mom would give? And she planted this seed in my head that my mom didn't want me and didn't want any of us. And that lived with me for the longest time. So, and we'll go into that. So as the story goes, she took us all the way around the outside of our neighborhood. And I you don't have any perspective, but I would say it was a couple miles, and we're just walking, and she's beating me up, and she's pushing me down, and everything's like, it's just not a good scenario. We end up, so we've gone in this full circle around the neighborhood, and she's at the very, very top of our street, way up our street. There was some woods, and in the back of the woods was a home that everybody said was the woman that lived there was, a recluse, and she was actually a witch. This woman was a witch that lived back there. And as kids, you have all these stories and everything, and you believe some of them, there's got to be some element of truth to it. Well, anyway, she obviously knew the story about this woman being a witch, and we went into the woods, we went to this woman's house, and she forced me to steal from this woman. We went into her backyard and we went in right up to the windows. We didn't go inside the house, but we went up to her back windows. There were all these like planters and plant pots on her windows, and I had to steal them. And she didn't even go into the yard. This woman's a witch and I'm stealing from this witch. And so we stole, I did everything she told me to do because she was physically and emotionally violent. And we came out, and then we came out of the woods at the top of the street, and one of the neighbors found us. So it wasn't, I was probably gone maybe 2-3 hours, and, eventually, obviously my sister started to weigh the odds and say, I'm going to be in more trouble if I don't say something than if I do say something. So then what happened is they set out a search party, like all the neighbors got involved, and they sent out a search party, and that's how the neighbor found us. But it was, and then after that, we never saw her again. Never. She they got the police involved. They got the parents. They got, served. This girl was obviously, there was a lot going on here with her, and we never, ever, ever saw her again. It was, but that stuck with me. And that's my new operating system, was my new belief system, was that my mom didn't want us. And so, and that's really, so the only thing that told me that my parents actually wanted me or loved me was we got presents at Christmas. Now, we didn't get a lot of presents. We never were anything wealthy, but we would get, like one toy and then a couple of small things at Christmas. And I'm like, my parents have to love me because they buy me something at Christmas. That was it. So again, in a previous episode, I've talked like we're this Victorian age. Imagine the queen raising her children. There's not this, no one ever said they loved you. No one ever kind of hugged you or expressed any emotions or never said so there was nothing of that. It was the business of raising children. And it was about being, don't embarrass us. Don't always look proper. Always, have your, neat clothes, hair combed. Appearances were everything. How you behaved was everything. The whole structure of growing up was about behaving, acting properly. Don't embarrass us. Don't embarrass us. Don't embarrass us. And so that was the foundation of everything. And then it was the business of growing up properly. What is expected of you. So now I can look back and I can see why things were the way they are. So if you go back to my mom, how she was raised. So my mom and dad were both born during World War II, and they were young during World War II, or they were born right before it. So they were where they knew what was going on. Like they were over the age of 5. I think my mom was 6 and my dad was 7 or 8 during World War II. And so they were very aware of everything that happened and the shortages and the things that the stories that they could tell you about it were so horrible. Like each person would get the rations where you could not survive on the rations. And each person would get 1 egg a week, but the eggs would always go and the meat would always go to the men because the men needed that. And, they're just, they had 1 bath a week. My father did, and they had 1 towel, and they all used the towel, and it would smell, and it was gross, and just all these horrible stories, and just how they were hungry all the time, and how there just was never enough food. There was nothing at Christmas. They made these little handmade presents, and so there was a lot of emotional trauma that came from that got carried through on everything about this fear of poverty, this fear of not having things. So it made things a lot of irration there. But the thing with my mother was during the war, she did not live with her parents. She lived with her grandmother. And then after the war, she continued to live with her grandmother and didn't live with her parents. And so, and she said her parents were not nice people. They were not kind people. But the only kind person she's ever had in her life was her grandmother. She was really sweet, really kind. But everybody on her father's side of the family were really mean. They were, and I'll tell you some of those stories are crazy because that's the entrepreneurial side of the family, and the crazy side of the family, really crazy. My mom lived with this grandmother, this kind grandmother, till she was 7 years old. And then when she was 7 years old, her mother got pregnant with her brother, and she was brought home to live with her parents to take care of her brother. So that was her job. And then they had 2 other daughters. So her job was raising the children and taking care of the children. So for her, raising children was a job. And she always felt this sense of like abandonment from her mom, that her mom didn't really want her. So when she married my father, the street that her parents lived on, they bought a house like 3 houses down. And then 2 years after, so finally, she's married. She's not responsible for her mother's children anymore. And so they were like 3 or 4 houses down. And so then, they married, they start having babies, and her mother moves away. So my mom basically raised, and there was 3 of us, and she raised us all by herself. She had no support system. I don't remember ever having babysitters. Maybe my grandmother on my father's side, maybe once or twice would come over. But her mother moved to a different country, so she wasn't even close by to help. So my mom had 0 support system. Her mother had abandoned her again. And there was something psychological that my mom couldn't deal with it. Like, she couldn't deal with us. And my sister would act out to get attention, and it would just escalate things. And so my mom was always, her number one threat was always that she was going to abandon us. She always said that, if you're not good, I am going to leave you. And it had such a weight, such a horrible, horrible weight, because it came from her soul. This is the cruelest thing I could do to any child. And it would have this weight behind it it was half joking, but it was half like trauma and pain behind it. And she would always threaten to leave us. And so my dad was a traveling salesman. He wasn't a salesman. He was a salesman that traveled. Like, he was gone on business all the time. And he would come back from these. So we would have to do these overseas trips, and he would come back, and my mom had been alone with us, no breaks, not one. And she would it would be like World War II in the house, and she would leave. And I always thought she never left permanently, because she just couldn't. She didn't have the financial means, and she would always tell us, you have to. And so she was a stay-at-home mom, obviously. She was 100% everything for us all the time. And she just always instilled in us, you cannot be dependent on a man. You have to have a job. You have to have something where you can support yourself. You cannot be dependent on a man. And then what you start to read is like, hey, if she could get out of this, she would. She would leave this. She would leave us. She doesn't want this job. She doesn't want to be a mom. She doesn't want this. And that's the lens. This girl put this lens over my eyes, and that's how I saw everything. So my whole life was built around trying to make her happy, because she was never happy. The only time that she was happy, which is really kind of bizarre with this program, was when she was being creative. She worked at a bakery before she was married. And she could create these fantastic cakes that all had like little animals and creatures and these, Disney scenes. Like, she'd mold it all out of marzipan, and she'd make these absolutely beautiful cakes. And she loved doing that. So for our birthdays, she would make us these fabulous cakes. It was amazing. And then in England, we have fancy dress up, which like a fancy dress costume, like like competitions. So it's kind of like Halloween. We don't have Halloween, but you would make costumes and then enter these, and she would make these costumes for us. And she was so good at it. She was so fabulous. And you can tell when she was being creative, that was her release. That's what she loved. She enjoyed, but it was very few and far between because her job was raising children. Raising children was her job, and she was just never happy. And the birthdays were horrible. Christmas was horrible. Anything we gave her, she would have all this self-doubt around, and she would end up taking everything back. In England, you don't take things back. It was very embarrassing. But when we came to America, she learned how to so she'd take everything back. But time you emotionally invested in a gift or a present, she would just be so unhappy. And, we never went to restaurants, but when we started going to restaurants, when we came to America, we would go to a restaurant on a birthday. So we go out to like Red Lobster if it was my birthday or my sister's birthday, and she would always order the wrong thing, and she would always be torn the decision between what she would order, and then it would always be the wrong thing. So I would always order her number 2 choice, and I would always switch with her. And so my whole life was about trying to make mom happy. So I'd help cook dinner, I'd do the dishes, I'd help out. I helped out wherever I could. I was the good one. I was the obedient one. I was the one that always had to get, I never the one they had to worry about. They never worried about me. And that was my role in trying to keep mom happy and trying to keep mom. That was my role. So I spent my whole life doing that. And then a lot of the crazy things that happened to me came from that, so like going with this girl, I should have really kicked and screamed, but no, I'm trying to be the good one, the obedient one. And respect your elders, even though she's a nutso 16-year-old, and, I know it's probably not going to end well, but, it ended up being that. So this whole thing carried, my whole life, this carried like trying to make mom happy. And she was just not happy. She's just somebody that had this level of unhappiness. And we all voted to move to America. We all voted, but it did not go well for my mom at all. So she didn't drive. She never drove, and she was forced to drive when we came to America. And that was really, she had where she had a few friends in England. As we grew up, she started to make more friends, and, she wasn't tied to the kids as much. She started to have, like a little job and, things like that. And, but we moved to America and she lost all that. And it was a very traumatic move for her. She just every day was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going back to England. And so my youngest sister was 9, I was 14, and my older sister was 16, and she was ready to go. Every day she was ready to go. Every day we were talking, trying to keep her here. But she's like, no, I just can't do this. And it was really hard. So that whole weight of abandonment was right there, always present when we came to America. Eventually we got through it. Eventually she found her groove. Eventually she was okay with the driving. She was okay with everything. But it really took a while for her to assimilate and to feel comfortable here and to make friends and to develop a community, because everything was so foreign to us. So that was really, really, really challenging. But the biggest thing was when we started having kids. Now we didn't start having kids till like late 20s. So, and I got pregnant, and then both of my sisters got pregnant. And so within 2 years, she went from 0 to 6 grandkids, and she absolutely adored her grandkids, and she loved kids. And I'm like, oh my God, my mom loves kids. She actually enjoys this job. Like, my whole perception was that she was miserable. And maybe at the time there was some mental illness. Maybe at the time she just didn't have what she needed, the support she needed to cope. Nobody ever babysat us. It was 100% with these kids all the time. And so maybe that's it. I don't know. But she loved her grandkids. So she began watching our kids like 2, maybe sometimes 3 days a week. Now, my older sister she lived in Columbus. And so my mom only had my kids and my youngest sister's kids. And my older sister moved back from Columbus, and my mom started trying to watch her kids too, but it was too much and she gave up on everybody. And so, my sister has always had this, like chip on her shoulder about mom, not being able to handle,